Thank you for the introduction, and thank you all for being here. Um, this is getting quite late, so thank you for being here. Um, I will talk about some basics on what are BadUSB attacks, how can you implement a few of them, and something that I forgot to note here is the why. Why would you want to implement such attacks? Well, if you're a red teamer, you might want to use BadUSB as an initial access vector if your client authorized you to do so. Also, for the blue teamers among you, you might want to test your infrastructure, your tools against BadUSB attacks. See what the EDR will see when such an attack is going to be used. Now, let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Cristian Pop, and as I described myself, I'm a CTF enjoyer. I really like taking part in CTFs and publishing write-ups for them. Professionally, I worked as a penetration tester, and right now I build security tools. Despite me moving into more of a builder role, I still remained passionate about hacking. So this leads us to the topic of today's talk. So what are BadUSB attacks? I will talk about how they appeared, how the term BadUSB appeared, and why do they work, how likely are they. Then I will go into 3 methods that you can use to implement them yourself. And then I will share some lessons learned from working on this project. First, what a BadUSB attack is not. A BadUSB attack is not a USB flash drive that has malware on it. It's also not a USB device that will deliver too much current and ruin your USB port and possibly the motherboard. That's a USB killer, and they exist. Also, it's not a USB attack that explodes. Those also exist, unfortunately. That's a real title from Ars Technica. Those 3 are bad, and they are USB, but they are not BadUSB. Enough with what they are not, what they are. The BadUSB term was initially coined at Black Hat in 2014 in the talk called On Accessories That Turn Evil by those 3 researchers that you can see, yes, around there. You can also watch it on YouTube. I recommend doing that. It's a very good talk, a very good and very technical talk. It's a deep dive into how USB works. Now, they shown that they could rewrite the firmware for some USB devices, and they could make them turn malicious in various ways. I will come back to that in a minute. And the main mechanism used by BadUSB is that after plugging in a device, the operating system will wait for the device to identify itself. And this is done by the operating system in order to use the appropriate driver. So it usually works like, hello, I'm a hard drive. And the OS will use a storage driver or a hard drive driver, or if possible, the driver for that manufacturer. So I don't know, maybe Samsung. But an evil one would respond, hello, I'm a keyboard. And the OS will start accepting input, keystrokes, from that thing that looks like a hard drive. In essence, this is what BadUSB is. Now, how bad can it get? In the original paper and the talk from Black Hat that I mentioned, they showed us multiple effects, multiple attacks that could be implemented by using BadUSB. DHCP on USB was by far my favorite. Basically, they made the USB device that was tampered with show up as a network card and then send a rogue DNS server that was then used to intercept traffic. So you plugged in a USB stick, and then all your traffic goes to the attacker's server. Pretty cool. Also, they showed virtual machine escape techniques, so escaping from stuff like VirtualBox or VMware. They also showed emulating a keyboard and sending keystrokes, like in my previous example with "Hello, I'm a keyboard." And that's what is called keystroke injection nowadays. They also showed how they could build a rootkit with this. That was really advanced. They took advantage of the BIOS and stuff like that. And again, if you're curious, go and watch that talk. It's pretty cool. However, nowadays, when people say BadUSB, they usually mean that one. They mean keystroke injection. Things that will behave like a keyboard. But also, I said a lot of times flash drive or thumb drive. This is not limited to flash drives. This can be anything. A popular target is a device that might not even need data, that you would think needs power, like a fan or that plasma globe that you can see right there. That was used in the red teaming exercise made by Google's red team. And this was part of a series on YouTube called Hacking Google. Again, amazing article, amazing series. I recommend them. In the article, they even talk about some of their challenges. They wanted to make that attack as platform agnostic as possible. And it's really cool. It's a really deep dive into this thing. Now, how likely are these attacks? Recently, last year, the FBI issued warnings against threat actors and APT groups that started using this kind of attack. They would deliver different USB devices to companies, especially to C-level executives and other high-level employees, like big targets. Despite that, the media can sometimes exaggerate the risks, but I would say that it's still worth it to be careful. I would personally recommend not plugging in any USB device that you don't know where it came from, what it does, what it's supposed to do at least. You can't really know what it does. It's a good layer of defense. Now, the title of the talk mentioned and how to implement them. So I will show you 3 ways of implementing such attacks. And I'm going to briefly talk about how easy they are to use, how stealthy they can be, that's useful for a red teamer, how costly they are, and how much you can use them to build new stuff, custom stuff. Before that, let me show you 2 payloads that I did my testing on. The first one is a very simple payload that opens a notepad and draws a message or types a message. I choose ASCII art because I think it looked cute. So this has limited usefulness. It's useful for a demo, or it might be useful for something like an awareness campaign. You do it in your company, you leave a device that's tempered somewhere. When someone plugs it in, this shows up. It's harmless. So yeah. The payload behind it was written in DuckyScript, which is kind of a spoiler for one of the devices that I will talk about. And let me talk about this payload for a bit. Delay, the first delay is there for a reason, but I will come back to that. GUI R is Windows plus R. This brings up run in Windows. We wait for a bit for a run to show up. Then string notepad will enter the notepad characters as you would from a keyboard. We press enter, and then we wait for notepad to run, obviously, and then we start drawing those ducks. So this is how the payload looks in DuckyScript. A second payload, a bit more useful for a red teamer, I would say, is a reverse shell. This is a very simple reverse shell. It might trigger detections, but it's a reverse shell nonetheless. Also, for reasons that I will get into a bit later, it's more difficult to execute. As you can see, it still begins with a delay. It still opens run with GUI plus R, and then it will run PowerShell and that long string from there. Yeah, that one. Basically, that downloads the payload that will actually perform the reverse shell and executes it. But the whole reverse shell logic is not contained here. It's on that PowerShell script that you can see right there linked in my server. Now, without any more delays, let's get into the first implementation, which I already spoiled. I called this the usual, because when you see BadUSB, you usually see this device. And as some of you might have already anticipated, it's the Hack5 rubber ducky. The cost of it is $80, $80 US, plus taxes and shipping, because those are not included usually. It's quite stealthy already. This is an advantage. It's basically a flash drive. It looks unsuspicious if you don't include the duck sticker, but you don't have to. And also it uses DuckyScript, which is the thing that I showed you before. I would say that the main advantage of it is DuckyScript and the whole community built around the rubber ducky. You can find help, you can find payloads. It will be really easy for you to find something that you want. The reverse shell that I showed you before was taken from Hack5's repository. And yeah, I would say that's a pretty useful pro for the rubber ducky. Oh, right. As for how customizable it is, you might include it in something else, but I haven't really seen it done like that. You can take out the outer shell of the rubber ducky and you will be left with the PCB. And that might be included in something like the plasma globe that I showed you before. So that's kind of its limitations. You can't really attach other things to it. Now, the second method is what I called overkill, because it's way more expensive and it's not really a way to implement just BadUSB. It's all over the social media too, but not only for BadUSB, and it's the Flipper Zero. As I said, it's popular. It costs way more, around $165 US plus taxes and shipping. And for a reference, it cost me around $225 to order it in Europe from the official supplier, which is Lab 401. Now, for stealth, this is a big, big no. You cannot hide this thing. You cannot trick people into plugging it in. It's not made for that. Also, I was able to convert payloads written in DuckyScript to what this is using. It's technically DuckyScript, but in order to call it DuckyScript, you have to license it from Hack5, and that did not happen here. It's just taking the text form of DuckyScript, and it's interpreting that. What I didn't mention for the rubber ducky is that it will need a binary form and not the text form. So you will need to use the Payload Studio from Hack5. That's easily available in your browser. So yeah, you can use DuckyScript. Now, for customizing, it has GPIO, but I have not seen it being used for BadUSB related things, and I don't even know if that's possible. Also, it might be useful to remote control it with your phone. You can pair it using Bluetooth, and then you can control it. I used it a few times to leave it plugged in to my computer and then trigger it remotely. I guess it's a gimmick, but it could be a plus. Now, you are probably thinking the next one is going to be even more expensive, right? Well, good news, no. The next one is the DIY option. So here I took a Raspberry Pi 0W, W for wireless, and I attached an adapter, a board to it that used some pogo pins. It connected to some data lines and the power pins. And it is now able to connect by using USB-A. It's basically a dongle PC, like an Intel compute stick. Now, stealth. It's not as stealthy as the rubber ducky, and no one in their right mind would confuse this for a legitimate USB flash drive, but you might make it look like something else. A USB card reader might work because it's bulkier. And also, remember the plasma globe. You can hide it in larger stuff. Now, instead of ducky script, this one uses a completely different language, which is HID script. That one was built using JavaScript, and it was made to make stuff like this easier. Now, for customizing, I think this is where this setup will really shine. You can add components to it. It has GPIO. You can add a modem and a SIM card to it. So that way you won't have to rely on the target's internet connection. You will always be able to communicate with your device payload. So yeah, how I choose to connect to it was the default method, which is by using wireless Wi-Fi. It exposes a Wi-Fi network. That's why I used the W model. And that one looks like this. I am basically able to use multiple functions from this UI. And this is how the HID script looks like. It's their demo payload. It's able to simulate a keyboard and a mouse at the same time. Now, let me take a step back. How I built this. So, the hardware that I used is, as I said, a Raspberry Pi 0W. You can probably do it with a 0, but you won't have Wi-Fi. I don't think it's worth it. An SD card, you can use a really small one. It doesn't need a lot of storage. And an adapter. I went the lazy way and bought one from Amazon for like 11 euros or dollars. Something like that. I found cheaper ones that also had a lower profile, so you were actually able to hide it easier or to make it stealthy and covert. And if you are into that, you can print your own PCB. And you can make that board yourself. It's just a few traces going into the USB data lines and power lines. It's simple. You can find the schematics online. Now, what about the software? I used what's called PoundPy Aloha, written like that. It's weird. It's LeetSpeak, actually. You can find it on GitHub, and it was based on Kali Linux. You flash it on your SD card, and you're good to go. It works literally out of the box. You can make changes to it. You can configure it. So, pretty fun device, I would say. Also, there are other methods that I haven't covered here, which are the USB Nova, USB Armory, expensive stuff like OMG cable that are built for some other purposes, or the Great Fat One from Great Scott Gadgets. That's also meant for like serious research on USB protocols. And pretty much a favorite of some hackers, microcontrollers. You can use Arduino, you can use an Intel microcontroller or a Raspberry Pi Pico, why not? That way you can literally build your own by interacting directly with the USB protocol. What I forgot to mention about the Pi is that it also allows you to implement the other attacks from the original paper. It also, with the software that I showed you, it will allow you to use DHCP on USB, which, again, super cool attack, worth trying out. Now, let me share some lessons that I learned while working on this project. First, about the payloads. You will never be able to see the output in your code. So you should always use those delays, like I did. Make sure that the program started before sending in any input. This is just a keyboard, remember. Keyboards don't see what's on the screen. There is an edge case. Basically, the LED used for scroll lock is almost never used. And that's a bit of data going from your PC to the keyboard. Using that, you could technically exfiltrate data. And a lot of scripts do use that feature. But that's very limited, and you can still not see what's on the screen. Also, variation between operating systems. Windows 11 initialized a keyboard almost instantly. No delays. Windows 10 did not. I had to wait those 2 seconds before relaying commands. And what I learned the hard way is keep payloads short. Download what's called a Spearhead script, that PowerShell script, if you remember it, this one, and use that for your logic. Use BadUSB just to trigger your Spearhead and not for doing the actual things. This way, you keep errors to a minimum. Also, I should mention that using Spearhead scripts will increase your chances of being detected if you're a red teamer. So strike a balance, I guess. Now, before going into defensive tips, let me share you a very interesting finding that I found. You know those things, those USB hubs that have switches on them that allow you to turn off a port. Well, the Flipper Zero was able to connect to my PC through that USB hub while it was switched off. And no other device was able to do this kind of thing. It boggled my mind. But I couldn't see any discussion about this behavior on Twitter or on Discord or other such communities. So I think I ran into a feature, I guess. Maybe not, but it's probably a feature. I think this would make for a very interesting research project, so I might try it. The hardware that's required is basically Flipper Zero and some switched hubs that you are okay with taking apart, and a logic analyzer, an oscilloscope, maybe even a multimeter could work. I don't know. I actually have no idea why that happens, so I don't know where to start, but maybe DefCamp next year, hopefully. Now, back to defensive tips. How can you defend against this kind of attack? My background is mostly an offensive security one, so this was kind of tough for me. One way of defending could be block everything that's not known good. So if you don't know this USB device is good, you block it. There are tools that can help with that, and I think Microsoft lets you do that to an extent with group policy. Now, there are also tools that detect very fast typing. I saw an article from Google that mentioned a tool they developed that does exactly that. I think that's only for Linux. And I get that this one is said over and over again, but awareness and trainings for users, for employees of organizations will go a long way. People shouldn't plug in any suspicious looking device. Well, let's wrap this up. Let's go again to what I talked about. I briefly discussed what a BadUSB attack is. They are attacks that rely on modified USB hardware, firmware, sorry. And I, again, recommend looking at the original paper and talk from Black Hat. They also have a lot of different capabilities, even though the most popular one is basically keystroke injection, emulating a keyboard. And you can implement them quite easily by buying a rubber ducky, using a Flipper Zero if you have one, using other such devices. The USB Nova is one that I would really like to try because it was, I think, cheaper than my DIY solution. And I think it's made in Germany, so it's not very far to ship from. And of course, you can build your own, as I showed you, using my setup or a microcontroller. And other stuff that I learned is that hard payloads are hard to build. You have to wait to put delays in your script. You have to keep them brief so that they have less failure points. I also learned about some ways to defend against those attacks, and I learned that the Flipper Zero really doesn't like being told no. Well, that being said, thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. My question is, first, one comment, probably Flipper Zero have own power supply, that's why the hub is not working. Because the hub basically depends on power supply, it cuts the power supply to the USB device. So Flipper Zero have own power supply. This is the reason why it works, most likely. My question actually is a little bit different. Do you have experience with sanitizing devices which can be used to prevent exactly such kind of attacks? And what's your advice if you have any experience in that direction? Thank you very much.
Thank you for the explanation. I heard that and I really want to test that hypothesis. It sounds like the most plausible one, so thank you for adding that. About sanitization, a very popular one is using an adapter or a cable that only has power lines and not data lines. However, that's only limited to phones, to charging phones, basically. So this does not apply to computers and sticks. For USB devices, I have experience with basically a toy project from school that identified USB devices by their ID. Part of it was set by the manufacturer, part of it was its own unique ID, and would allow only those devices to connect to the operating system. However, those could be spoofed, so I don't really know how to defend against that.
Maybe super quick clarification with Flipper Zero. When you mentioned that it's not super stealthy, I think recently I read about being able to pair your Flipper Zero with the victim, let's say, and just control everything super wirelessly through the Bluetooth. Is that also what you mentioned in the slide with the...
Oh no, so that one was pairing with my phone.
Because
so that
now
I control it remotely.
So now you can just turn on the Bluetooth on Flipper, hope the victim connects to you, and then you just run, I guess, Bluetooth, bad Bluetooth, not instead of bad USB. It's super stealthy and super creepy.
Oh.
But maybe it might be a separate firmware. I think it's not the official one, so it gets super stealthy there.
Thank you. didn't know about that. I will look into it.
I can show you afterwards if you want.